Of all the decks this format, there is one in my eyes that is the best counter to the meta right now, and that's Labyrinth. What's up and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be going over one of the best decks you could choose to counter the current meta. I really mean it, this deck has so many good matchups, plus post side this deck gets even more unfair. We're going to go through the card by card and I'll show you exactly what I'm playing and why I'm playing it. Labyrinth has evolved into this heavy trap build and this list does take a similar approach. But of course, before we jump into all that, make sure you grab yourself a cup of coffee or something. That way you guys can sit down and tune in. So of all the decks this format, Labyrinth really does feel like the best equipped deck to deal with all the different things you could run into this format, but also post side, there's so many different tools this deck can abuse. Most of the hand traps that are being used this format are actually really bad against this deck as well, so I really mean it, this deck just has so much going for it, and that's why I love playing it right now. But without wasting any more time, for the monsters, first is 3 copies of Arius. This is actually the heart and soul of this deck. As I mentioned, we are playing a heavier trap lineup. This is kind of the standard of what this deck is doing right now, but it makes for a body that always recurs itself from the grave, and the fact that it also has the ability to use this effect on your turn makes it to where now you can start firing off your cards early as if you had access to Coup Clock. One thing I'm doing a little bit differently is I'm still opting to run 2 copies of Lady Labyrinth. Recently it's been more common to run 1, but I've just found the second copy is so important. Since we're playing so many Labyrinth cards, obviously it pairs very well with this card. Obviously we're only playing 1 Lovely, so by only playing 1 Lady, now you only have 2 boss monsters in the deck. Again, technically 1 of each is all you need, but people are constantly trying to hit my Lovely with SP Little Knight, and of course the Snake Eyes players are always trying to put them in the spell and trap zone. Lady can't be targeted, but there's a lot of ways your opponent can get rid of your back row before committing to removing it. So for me, if I'm only playing 1 and 1, if my opponent can banish 1 and throw the other in the spell and trap zone, this deck has a really hard time trying to come back from that situation. If you really wanted to play 1 to fit in some other tech cards that we will talk about later, I definitely would understand. But for me, the Labyrinth engine on its own is very strong, and of course alongside it we're going to be playing 3 of the Stratos Ariane. Not much to explain here. I think this engine is fairly standard. Again, 1 Lady is debatable, but again, I just really value maxing out or at least playing a lot of engine in this deck, because as powerful as your normal traps are, it's really the Labyrinth cards that carry you to victory. We're still playing all of the furnitures, of course, 3 copies of Chandelier alongside 3 copies of our Stovey Torby. I'm only opting to run 1 copy of Coup Clock because we have Arius, which acts very similar to this card, but it's still very important to have this in the deck. We are also playing the Backjacks. This card is so much fun to play in this deck because even if we don't have access to the furniture cards, there's so many different ways we can get it sent to the grave. There are so many mind games you can do to your opponent with this card, and that's why I love including it in this deck. One of my favorite things about the playstyle of this deck is the grind game you're always trying to be in, and of course always trying to out-resource your opponent, putting them in a position where your trap cards can just win the game. But speaking of the trap cards, first of which is going to be our Trap Trick. This card gets you access to any normal trap in your deck at any time, plus it also acts like engine because of course we're going to be playing 3 copies of Big Welcome, and I'm also opting to run 3 copies of the regular Welcome. Some players will opt to run the field spell over the 3rd Welcome Labyrinth, and I can totally understand that, but for me, with Arius in the deck, I just want to max out on all the normal traps we can play because I want to make sure if ever I have access to that card, it's always going to be live. For some of the other normal traps we're playing, obviously 3 copies of Imperm. We're not playing Nibiru, even though it's a great card in this deck, especially paired with the furnitures. So many decks have ways to play around Nibiru, and obviously when you pair it with other interruptions, then it's an insane card. But also there's matchups like obviously the Mirror Match and of course Tenpai as well, and even Melodious that really just does not care about Nibiru. So for me, the only reason I'm still opting to run Imperm is, again, it is an interruption, but also having access to effect negation that you can pull out of the deck at any time is so important when using your traps to prevent your opponent from playing. But one of the best normal traps in this deck is the Karma Cannon. Whenever you see this card, you can basically assume you're not gonna die. There are ways your opponent can play around it, but when you pair it with all the other trap cards and the Labyrinth engine as well, it's so hard for your opponent to get through your field. Basically, every meta-relevant deck can get hindered by this card, and that's why you have to max this out. Not only because, again, drawing it with Arius is insane, but you need multiples in the deck for your Trap Trick as well. The only downside is this does not trigger all the Labyrinth effects in the graveyard, but we do have an answer to that. Of course, we're playing 3 copies of Punishment. Again, another card that a lot of players will opt to run at 2, but to me, I feel like this is one of the most high-impact traps, at least right now, especially with all the cards we have in the extra deck. It's it's so versatile for this deck, and that's why I've maxed it out. Again, the fact that having 3 is important for Trap Trick is relevant as well, but Dogmatica Punishment really does address so many of the different problems that this deck might run into. And again, you could cut down on some of these traps to make room for Nibiru if that's something you really wanted, and you can even cut the card I'm about to show now, but I just feel like this is one of the strongest cards in the meta right now, and that's 3 copies of Skill Drain. A lot of players will opt to run something like Rivalry because it is pretty good going second as well. I found as good as it is against Snake Eye, there are so many other matchups that can play around the card as well, so I've personally decided to side deck it. There's a reason why decks like Runic Stun are main decking this card as well. It is so oppressive against most of the meta, and that's why I think this deck can abuse it so well. It might seem weird at first because it can turn off your Lovely or your Lady Labyrinth, but again, with cards like Big Welcome Labyrinth or even your Karma Cannons, there's so many ways to flip your monster face down or put them back in the hand. That way you can resolve your effects even under Skill Drain. Just like Snake Eyes can send their Snake Eyes Ash to the grave to summon a Flamberg, this deck has so many ways to work around this effect as well. So again, while you could include more hand traps or even the field spell, or heck, if you really want to play Extravagance, that's another option as well. But for me, sometimes I just think it's super important to play some of the strongest and most degenerate cards in the game because they're that good and it makes every deck struggle. Skill Drain with a bunch of trap cards is insane for any deck to have to get over, especially game 1s when Lightning Storms aren't really in the mix. I've personally fallen in love with the power and quality that this card offers the deck, but speaking of quality, I have fallen in love with, we have a new partner on the channel that makes some amazing product for you guys to get your hands on. Grimoire Accessories makes some beautiful products for players to choose from. They've recently released the Cthulhu line of products that come in a beautiful green and purple as well, and trust me, I know how amazing their product is because they were kind enough to send me one to try. They also sent me the deck box that goes alongside it, and the art in this thing is amazing. The box has plenty of room for a double-sleeved main deck, extra and side. It has a dice tray and comes with a leather divider as well. Again, the quality of this product is so insane. Grimoire has partnered with the channel, so you can use my link down below and make sure you use code COFFEE5 and save 5% off of any purchase you make. Not only will you be able to get your hands on any of their amazing products, but a portion of that purchase comes back to the channel and it helps me make content for you. The detail and art on these things are amazing, but hopping into the extra deck, for the first one we're playing, of course, it's Relinquish Anima. Not only do we have Coup Clock that can recur itself to go into this card, but also it gives us a way to link off our backcheck if we happen to open it and want to use it as our normal summon for turn. Since it's a link monster, it also can help us with SP Little Knight, but there's actually so many different ways we can abuse its banishing effect in this deck as well. Luckily, we don't have to play multiples, but one that we are is 2 copies of Muckraker, not only being a great way to recur some of the boss monsters in your graveyard, but also it's a way to discard those backchecks, setting up more interruptions on your opponent's turn. The last link that I'm opting to play is the Tri-Brigade. This is the first of our punishment targets. 3500 attack makes it to where punishment can out most cards in the game, but when it's sent to the grave, we can also send the Tri-Types, one being Garura, so you'll out a big monster and then get to draw a card as well. But also another option you can send is the Chimera, the King of Phantom Beasts, which has an amazing graveyard effect that I actually use quite often. During your opponent's turn, you can banish it to special summon any of your fiends from your graveyard. It summons illusions and stuff like that as well, but again, our whole deck's fiends and we're just trying to recur our boss monsters from the grave. There's also going to be times where your opponent's able to whittle down your resources and stop your engine from circulating, so at the end of your opponent's turn, just being able to bring out Ariane to get a search and get your whole engine back online is very important for this deck. I mentioned it earlier, your opponent's always going to be trying to SP Little Knight your Lovely, so we're also playing Berfament as a target for punishment as well. It's not one of the Tri-types, so we can't send it with the Tri-Brigade, but just like the Chimera, on your opponent's turn you can quick effect banish it, but instead of summoning one from the grave, you can summon one from the banishment. Labyrinth always has struggled with having your Lovely banished, so by having access to this card, it's one of the best ways to make sure that's not a problem. There are some other punishment targets that you can play as well that I am opting not to play, but I just find that since this deck is always trying to be in the grind game, these cards really enable it and add to that grind as well. The last fusions I'm playing is 2 copies of Natis. Of all the punishment targets, this is the one that could actually come up multiple times. There's really not much to explain here, but it's so nice to not only be able to pop the monster with punishment, but then even out spells and traps that might be in your way. I am playing one more punishment target, which is the Aggregator, and I actually think this is so important for the Snake Eyes matchup. When it's sent to the grave, you can target a monster on your opponent's side of the field and negate its effects. It's really not the craziest thing, but when your opponent normal summons Snake Eye Ash, punishment becomes very valuable. They'll add Poplar to hand and then activate its effect to special summon. Then Chain Link 2, you can use punishment to pop the Ash and send Aggregator to the grave. After that, the chain will resolve, Poplar will hit the field, and their effect to search will activate as Chain Link 1 because they're turn player. Aggregator will activate as Chain Link 2, and now you can negate that Poplar, preventing them from getting any of their Sinful Spoils cards. And now all they have is that level 1 body that has its effects negated, and Ash is in the grave, wave, so you don't have to worry about any Flambergs coming out of nowhere. Again, you don't have to play Aggregator, but for me in the Snake Eyes matchup, it comes up all the time with Punishment. But the last two pseudo boss monsters for the deck, 2 copies of Typhon, and of course 2 copies of Chaos Angel. You could get away with running 1 copy of Chaos Angel if you really wanted to, but for me, these are some of the strongest cards in the extra deck, so I always want to make sure I have access to them at any time. And the fact that these are also Fiends gives you so much synergy with the deck. But trust me, test this deck out for yourself. It has so many good matchups right now, and post side, you have so many different options. But that's gonna wrap things up for today's video. Thanks again for tuning in. This deck is so much fun to play, so please go try it out yourself. Post side, you can bring in D-Barriers, any of the Virus cards, even the DDG. There's so many different cards that are so annoying for any deck to have to run against. Plus, the grind game that this deck is always trying to be in is one of the funnest playstyles that I personally enjoy playing. Make sure you go check out Grimoire accessories. The link is down below, and make sure you use my code as well. But once again, thanks for tuning in, and here's hoping to see you on the next one. Peace.